It's been over 9 months since I last talked about Baki on the channel, where we discussed my favourite character in the series, Hanma Yujiro. So of course we're going to talk about him again, or more specifically, his relationship with Baki, and so that is what we shall discuss today. So if you find yourself entertained at any point during the video, then consider liking, subscribing and ringing that bell, as I can explain to you how much such a small action can do for this channel. And if you want to support this channel even further, then perhaps check out my Patreon. Anyway, on with the video. Baki is a series about, who would have guessed it, Baki. But there's actually a lot more depth and importance to this fact than you may first suspect. As well, what is the main narrative of Baki through to the end of Son of Ogre? It is the story of Hanma Baki, our titular protagonist, coming of age. It is the story of his life, or well, his life mission, to fight and defeat his father. Again, this is in very simple terms. And so it can be agreed that Yujiro, Baki's father, was the one to create Baki. And yes, the word create here is very specifically chosen for reasons you will soon discover. So to reiterate, Yujiro created Baki, a perfect meal for him to enjoy, a tool for his quest for strength, a worthy rival. And since the story of Baki is about Baki coming to fight Yujiro, as Yujiro planned, it's not incorrect to say that Yujiro was the one to lay out the story. So in some very clever writing from Itagaki, you can say that Yujiro created not just Baki the character and our protagonist, but also Baki the manga series itself, since he was the one to orchestrate the events of the story by raising Baki up to fight him. He is the one to dictate the course of the story as if he himself is the one writing it, like he is some kind of god, and this I think is blatantly deliberate. Now, god imagery around Yujiro is rampant across the series, and he's commonly compared to both the Judeo-Christian god and the Buddha. But the most important aspect of his portrayal, at least in my opinion, is the idea that God is everything. He is all good, but also all bad. Yujiro does some truly heinous things, but at the same time is a saviour for the weak. He cannot be so narrowly classed as good or bad because he is both and more. Yujiro is what I like to describe as the pinnacle. He is more human than any other. He expresses more greed, more joy and more rage than any other human alive. He is simultaneously the best of what we can be and the worst that we can be. He is, as I said, a pinnacle, and as such he stands atop the world. He's the strongest living creature, and so he dictates every other creature, as no one can stand against him. The world literally revolves around him, as the only reason things occur is because he lets them. He isn't a literal divine being in the world of Baki, but he still fills the same role as one who stands above everyone. No one can oppose him, and as such, he is as good as a literal god, and also a literal devil. If he has a son for the sole purpose of making the opponent to fight, then that son has no choice but to become strong and be his opponent. It is not possible to go against his will. And so this is Baki's fate, to be a literal toy for his father, a person who was created as a tool for Yujiro's quest for power. This is something quite literally shown in his fight with Oliver, and then again in his fight with Yujiro. And so Baki's journey to fight his father is part of not God's, but Yujiro's plan. Baki then, in a similar way to his father, is portrayed as the son of God. There's obvious comparisons to Rahula, the son of the Buddha, but I think the Jesus comparisons are the most nuanced. Jesus took on the sins of man to spare humanity from God's wrath, and Baki took on the focus of his father to spare the rest of humanity from the wrath of the ogre. He becomes a sacrificial lamb to Yujiro's endless desire for strength. Someone quite cruelly highlighted when Baki says that he only feels the greatest pleasure when in pain, and how he smiles whenever he takes a hit. He may act rebellious in parts and want to fight his father for his mother's sake or for his own hatred, but this all goes according to what Yujiro laid out. It's all part of the story he weaves, which is why in this final fight between them, Baki defies his father's dictated path and strives out as his own man, as not a tool, but as Hanma Baki. I mean, this is the reason they don't fight till Baki is 18, because it's Baki's last step to becoming an adult and growing up, which is fitting since the whole series is a metaphor for a boy growing up. Baki doesn't end the story as Yujiro's tool but as his son, and by doing so successfully defies the will of Yujiro, of the world's metaphorical god. This is why he earns the title of world's strongest creature, because he becomes the first creature to overcome the pinnacle. Not by punching hard to Yujiro or by beating him in a fistfight, but by defying his will and becoming his own man. This is why him flipping the imaginary table is so significant, because it is him flat out telling his father that he isn't a meal to be eaten. And while that's not the only symbolism in this masterful scene, as when Baki calls Yujiro's miso soup salty, he's saying that Yujiro failed at something, that the food he cooked wasn't quite as it should be, which is an obvious reference to himself, the meal that Yujiro could not eat, the one that didn't come out as intended. It's basically Baki calling Yujiro out on his failure, once again a clear defiance of the pinnacle and the reason he is worthy of being called the world's strongest creature. And well, who can forget the obvious subversion in having Baki the son flip the table, not Yujiro the father, proving Baki is now not a boy anymore, but a full-fledged man. And because this scene keeps getting deeper, we have the fact Yujiro is pulled into the fantasy. He not only admits that the soup is too salty, but goes to catch the imaginary bowls and chopsticks, and is such pulled into a fantasy that Baki created. As in Baki, there is more to winning than just physically beating them into submission. This is the whole point of the prisoner arc. Despite losing multiple times throughout this arc, the prisoners never admit true defeat, because to defeat someone truly, you must prove them wrong. Baki proves Oliver's idea of freedom is wrong by beating him in the same way Dorian was shown that he can never truly win a fight to begin with by Retsu. This is a true victory in Baki. And so how does this apply to Baki versus Yujiro? Well, think back to the start of Son of Ogre. Yujiro mocks Baki's imagination-based training, saying,
殺されもせぬ、食われもせぬ。いかに巨大化しようが、想像はあくまでも想像。実物の子犬にも劣る代物よ。
This is why he just ignores Musashi's imaginary strikes, because he doesn't care for those things that are just make-believe. Yet Baki was able to pull him into the fantasy and make him believe something imaginary was real. He imposed his will upon Yujiro, and by doing so once again illustrates that he is able to oppose the will of the strongest creature, which is what earns him the title, as the one and only being on the planet who can oppose the will of Yujiro. Now so far I've really emphasised the idea that Baki comes of age and so defies Yujiro, the quote-unquote god of this world, but another key aspect of their relationship and why their final fight works so well as a conclusion to the story is that in its most basic part, this series is just about a boy trying to get the recognition of his father. Now I don't think this idea is that novel when analysing Baki. Probably the most famous quote from Grappler Baki after all is,
男と生まれたからには誰でも一生のうち一度は夢見る地上最強の男。グラップラーとは地上最強の男を目指す格闘士のことである。
The fighters we see who strive for strength no matter the cost are just children who never woke up from dreaming. Baki is literally a kid who wants to get as strong as his old man. Baki at no point in this series has a misunderstanding of their relationship. Sure, he goes through a rebellious phase once, he kills his mum, but Baki always sees Yujiro as his father. But Yujiro, having raised Baki as a meal and an opponent, doesn't see Baki as his son in the same way most fathers do. Son of Ogre showcases this most clearly. Everyone is spitting chips and quaking in their boots at the thought of these two actually fighting, but every time it's brought up, Baki pushes it off and says that it is just a father and a son quarrel, because to him, that is what it is. Even if they are the two strongest beings on the planet, to Baki he is not fighting the ogre or the world's strongest, but just his old man, one he admires. I mean, just look how angry he gets at the prospect of his father running away from Kaku, as because in his mind his father is an invincible fighter because deep down he really admires him. Baki inviting Yujiro over for dinner is such a pivotal moment in the series, as it is the start of a change in Yujiro, of Baki trying to forge a relationship with Yujiro, to understand the person he has fought so hard to earn the praise of. It's the start of a reconciliation between father and son, symbolised by how their fight ends with a meal as well. Through the appearance of Ghost Yujiro, we get to see a small glimpse of how broken Yujiro and his own father's relationship must have been, and although this isn't to excuse Yujiro's actions, it does paint a picture of why he treats Baki the way he does, because he himself never had this normal father-son relationship. The whole fight is just the two playing catch-up, simulating the father and son life they missed for 18 years. In the only way these two know how, by fighting. They found common ground in fighting, and so only when Baki is strong enough to fight Yujiro can they have a proper dialogue. Baki tries to breach his gap with the home-cooked meal, but in the end it's only by fighting the two can truly communicate. This entire fight, this Last Supper if you will, is a microcosm of the entire narrative, of a son's constant pursuit of his father's approval, ending in him finally getting it and so growing up into a man and taking his own path. It's a perfect ending to the series in my opinion, a coming of age story that ends when our titular protagonist comes of age. And further to this, Baki-Do is the perfect continuation, as what does Baki-Do mean? It means the way of Baki, or the path of Baki. It's a series about the path Baki will now walk as a man with his father's approval, and well, whether you think Bakito has succeeded on this or not is up to interpretation. But that's beside the point, as Baki and Yujiro's relationship and their subsequent fight is just amazing. We see the idea of an ambitious boy, a dreamer, who wants his father's praise taken to the extreme, and of a father learning what it means to be a father. A boy growing up into a man is a journey of maturing and life experience, and this is represented in Baki by the quest to get stronger, maturing as a fighter through new experiences. A boy must surpass their father and become a man themselves, and a father must let their son grow up and realise they have their own lives to live. Baki is a story about a father and a son, and so of course the pinnacle of its storytelling comes from a quarrel between the two. A fight that leads to a mutual understanding and answers to both parties what it means to be a son and what it means to be a father. Well, that was a fun video to make. I think the thematic messages of Baki are often overlooked in favour of the fandom's constant obsession with power scaling and versus matches. But I do hope I have at least partially convinced you all of the deeper themes of the most testosterone-filled manga out there. I don't plan on making these Baki videos too regularly, but I do have a few more planned, so look out for them when they drop. Comment of the week comes from It Shaz, and thanks for the comment as always. If you are interested in my literary endeavours, then why not check out my books Gang, Fluid Justice and People of Fate Volume 1, available at Amazon.com. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting this channel, then consider pledging to my Patreon, where for as little as £2.75 a month, you can get your name at the end of the video, like Hikari Desu, 7SO, Rinjak9696 and Dewey. So with all that said and done, I've been Seth the Sin, the Deadly Sin of Geek, and I'm signing out. Stay safe, everyone.